Excellent. Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is the Internet of Things. We'll talk about the IoT market overall, as well as developments in security and analytics. To talk about that, we've got four leading experts, including Nigel Upton, Worldwide Director and General Manager of IoT at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Hello to you, Nigel.
Hi, thank you.
And you are there in your home office in Scottsdale today, correct?
I am. It's nice and warm here.
I bet. 120 degrees, they say, on the way.
Something to look forward to.
Also with us is Jason Shepard, Director of IoT Strategy and Partnerships at Dell. Hello to you, Jason.
Good afternoon.
And you are there in Austin, sunny Austin, correct?
Sunny and warm Austin, yeah.
Right. Mike Matchett, IoT Analyst and Solutions Architect at Tenasia Group. Hello to you, Mike.
How you guys doing?
And I know today is your birthday, so we have you working on your birthday.
I'm looking forward to the cake. You
brought we have
cake,
a cake
right?
around here somewhere. I definitely have cake. And Chris Preisberger, Editor of Features and Analysis at eWeek, my colleague here at Quinn Street. Hello to you, Chris.
Hello everybody.
And I know you are very close to the IoT beat, so that's good.
The IoT beat seems to be everywhere.
Right, IoT is definitely growing, and which brings us to our first question. I want to get the take from the four of you on where the Internet of Things market is right now. Of course, there's a lot of rosy predictions about where it's headed in the next several years. I think about IoT as more emerging tech than really truly established tech. Agree or disagree? So where is the IoT market? Nigel, what's your sense right now, and what do you see getting a lot of traction in the IoT market?
So we judge where the market's growing by how much revenue we drive out of it. Funny, my boss insists on revenue out of this for some strange reason.
They are picky that way, aren't they?
I know. So we are driving a lot of money today out of connected car, out of smart cities, and out of smart energy. But it tends to be quite specific. Connected car is such a broad spectrum, and if you talk to a telco, they claim they own connected car, and if you talk to the head unit manufacturers, they claim they own it. So there's so much going on in that space, and we're seeing real traction there. Mm-hmm. But we also see it happening on the that's the vertical. But on the horizontal layer, we see a lot of interest in edge computing, and we see a lot of interest in saying, look, I've got all of this heavy equipment stuff, particularly from the OT guys, so the GEs and Siemens and Schneiders and ABBs, and they've got these heavy machines out there, a ton of sensors, ton of data, and they're very reluctant to send all that data up into the cloud, so they're doing as much pre-processing as they can, mm-hmm. and they're getting more and more data, so they need more and more horsepower at the edge, and so we're seeing a real uptick in saying, give me more horsepower at the edge so that I can do more pre-processing, more pre-analytics, and then use the cloud for the exception side rather than try and send everything over expensive lines.
But do you agree that IoT is more emerging tech than established tech at this point? Are we well on our way or almost there, or where are we at?
I was doing M2M 6 or 7 years ago, so IoT for me is an evolution of where we've been before, and connecting devices we've done since RFID days. So it's continued to evolve, but now it has a sexy new label that means that it's seen as brand new, and every board wants to know what their IoT initiative is. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the ability to connect devices and gather data from them and take inference from that has been around for a long time, but it's now accelerating to everything.
Jason, what's your sense of where the IoT market is these days? Are we really emerging? Are we mostly there? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, we're emerging. I mean, I totally agree with Nigel. I mean, IoT is a buzzword to apply to things that have been around for a long time. Now, the things that are different, it's the mashup of data with back-end systems, so actually connecting formerly isolated things to the back end. I mean, obviously, M2M is a little bit different in that front, but from an industrial standpoint, it's like connecting these formerly isolated systems to back-end data to make things better. That's kind of a new trend. There's people becoming more comfortable with that. Or even just kind of on-premise systems, just like mashing up data, IT and OT types of data. And the other big thing that's happening is that the cost points are coming down to where things that have been done for a long time are now becoming accessible to the masses. So IoT to us really represents the ability to have these things start to hit scale and be changing the lives of people much broader than just the folks that have been investing lots of dollars in these types of technologies previously. So that's like, I think, the big inflection point. We're coming out of that the hype cycle for sure. Super noisy, of course, right now, and obviously we'll talk about that, today. But to us, it's that inflection point, and definitely this market goes vertical before it goes horizontal. It's extremely important to go on use cases and really focus on that ROI. We get people that come in. If someone comes to us and says, "Hey, I want to buy some IoT," it's not really the right customer.
Right.
Go, come to people that have like a real problem to solve that you can go address. Totally agree with the edge compute side, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about analytics, but definitely we've been driving that since the beginning of our strategy. So really in agreement there.
Mike, what is your take about the current IoT market? Are we there, or what's holding us back, if anything is?
Well, I mean, we looked at a lot of different factors. We've seen big data, we've seen faster networks, we've seen devices roll out to the edge, we've seen some $50 Raspberry Pis. Anybody can make IoT things that are actually internet connected. You've got your Amazon order more Tide button you can stick on the wall by your washing machine. And Google Nest thermometers, all this stuff's really commoditizing, as Jason just mentioned. But I think there's some big concerns we still have on you talk about edge computing to talk about data volume, but I don't think we've even seen the start of the data volumes that are going to get created. I think we're going to see people start to really get concerned about whether they have access up and down their supply chain to these data streams, and how do you make that available if you're in the middle of a supply chain? How do you negotiate that access? Security is going to be a huge problem when your devices aren't just reporting on everything, but they might actually be programmable as well. And you've got a lot of surface area to attack on the Internet of Things when you get down to that level. So lots of great opportunity, but also a lot of concerns as we interconnect everything.
The data question never fails to amaze me. It's like everything we do creates more and more data, especially IoT. And you think about IoT is a one-way street. IoT also has a possibility to be a two-way street, at which point the data stream, increases exponentially. Where are we going to store it all? It's a discussion for a different day. But Chris, what's your take? The current state of the IoT market, where are we right now?
Well, that's a general question. I like that, though. But you know what? I like what Jason said a minute ago, too. It just struck me. Somebody going into a company like Dell or HP or anybody else and saying, hey, I want to buy some IT, and I'll have a little of this, a little of that, and a little of this, put it all together so that my business can work better. I like that idea. But it is an evolving thing, and we have had these devices and this broadband, and we had this connectivity for a long time. I think that it's got, like one of you said, there's a buzzword that's put on it. The media is guilty as anybody because we use it all the time. But once something has a clever label and a memorable and an easy-to-use label, then all of a sudden it seems fresher and it seems newer. And it's really not that new. However, it is being democratized slowly but surely. The larger players have been using these for a long time. And as time goes on, as these devices become cheaper and more easy to get and use, and as the software and the analytics are able to be used in the cloud, and anybody can do a DIY type thing, do it yourself. As it becomes simpler to use, then it becomes more democratized. Smaller and smaller companies will be using these things in their businesses. They'll find use for them, and then that's when the market's really going to start taking off. We're not anywhere near that yet, but I think a lot of the key foundation blocks are in place for that. And companies like HP and Dell have their platforms now, and others, and developers are learning how to put these things together. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of this as time goes on.
When I think about things that are holding us back from IoT adoption, QuinStreet did a research study, and security was one of the key concerns that businesses have. Are we really secure with our IoT deployment? So, Jason, what would you say to a business that's concerned about the security aspect of the Internet of Things? Is that real? Not so real? Or what? Could you reassure them on that regard?
No, I mean, it's definitely real. I mean, a lot of the things. Security is clearly paramount to these types of deployments. You really want to start out being careful of, when we talk about already, is this when you start pushing down actuation or control from certainly the cloud, but even
and what do you mean by actuation? Just so
basically, like actuating a pump or turning something on that spins, like that people might be nearby, or like literally like being able to control a autonomous vehicle from remote site.
Okay.
When you don't have some sort of data diode to prevent that type of control coming in from a hacker, it's a problem. So that's why, you know, that sending data north, like to the back end, or to, you know, keeping it on-prem is sort of like that starting point, but still kind of doing that new thing, which is adding less expensive sensors, you know, focusing on really targeted problems, bringing in ERP, CRM, social, but just being careful of how you approach it. So that's one kind of way to ask the security question. The other way to address it is to work with a credible player that works in IT class security, and that's why, you know, companies like us are getting involved. We're here to go bridge those operations companies. Companies have been doing this for a long time with new tools, new infrastructure, you know, certainly that security manageability to bridge between. Everyone's seeing the Venn diagram now of IT and OT, you know, kind of coming together in IoT. But our whole goal here is to lift up operations-focused partners, giving them credible IT class, you know, infrastructure to go solve problems in more accessible ways. That's the goal here. I'd also say on security, it's all about finding the right size of security. So you don't have to, you know, buy the use case. Again, it depends on what you're doing. What are the implications if there's a problem? And also
the right size, did you say?
Right size. So like you're not going to throw the kitchen sink at every use case, because what happens is if you make it too difficult to implement because it's so many layers of security, people won't adopt it. Now on the consumer side, it's going the opposite way, where they make it like so easy to hook up stuff, or try to, that basically people go, oh, return, password, and then they get it on the network, and all of a sudden there's no security. So that's where you see a lot of those breaches. You want to find that kind of happy medium between securing it appropriately and then working with companies, you know, that have that pedigree of securing these types of solutions and applying the right level. So it's totally warranted. It's very important. But we actually see data integration as one of the bigger challenges, and actually use case focus is one of the bigger challenges up front. You know, first you need to figure out what your goal is, and then you go, you know, obviously in a very, very lockstep, you go secure it. But that's been one of the biggest things, is the fragmentation with data, you know, use cases, too many companies, like confusing customers. It's what's holding us back, you know, even more so than security.
Mike, what do you think about security? Is that what would you tell companies that are concerned about security in IoT?
Well, you obviously have to have a multi-layered approach to thinking about security, where the devices are, the data in transmission, the data in storage, where you're pushing out analytics, and as you mentioned, actuating. I'm going to start using that word.
I love that word, don't you? I'm going to start using that as well.
Actually, because I think of it as programmable, but yeah, remote control, right? I'm going to fly the drone and not just look at the video it's taking and push the fire button as well. So, you know, I think there's a lot going on there. You know, it is definitely, I think, a bigger problem than anybody could solve at a small level. So I'm glad to see that larger companies are starting to step into the breach and say, hey, we can help you approach this from a comprehensive perspective.
Nigel, I know you think about connectivity in security. Talk to me about connectivity and where that comes from in terms of IoT. What's important about that?
So, in my mind, it all depends on who you're talking to, and it's similar to security as well. If you look at it from the consumer side, then connectivity, there's a certain perception of what they need on that. Then you look to the enterprise, and then you look to the OT guys, and it's all different. So, just stepping back, you know, the key for us is the data, and how to make sure that that data goes over secure connections. But we have that phrase of, you know, the right connection for the right device. When you talk to a telco, then funnily enough, everything is solvable through a cellular connection. But I guess if you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. But if you the companies like Sigfox and the LoRa Alliance weren't around 2 or 3 years ago, and the sudden acceleration of being able to use unlicensed spectrum.
Well, explain who those vendors are, just so people don't know.
Yeah, these are, so this is unlicensed spectrum where they can use connectivity using wavelengths that are longer, and therefore this is ideal for the low power wide area networks where you have devices that have a limited amount of power that perhaps have a battery in them, but they're buried inside, say, a bridge or a device or in a wall, but they're not easily accessible, so you can't change the power supply. So those devices need to be able to have a network that is not constantly pinging them saying, are you awake, send me data, send me data. They'll only do that once a day, once a week, whatever it is. So these are very low power devices that need a connection that is a very low bandwidth on them, and they're normally sending tiny pieces of data, small chunks, but they're not doing it as often as say a cellular network that would continually ping to see if the device was still attached to the network. So Sigfox and the LoRa Alliance are two examples of companies that have gone and created this new type of network, which is very attractive if you're looking for a low-cost alternative to cellular. And they're right now building out their network city by city. Funnily enough, they're both French, and I'm English, so we have a natural affinity.
You can get past that, though.
I've got past that. So we actually joined the LoRa Alliance, and Sigfox in the US is actually run by an old colleague of mine who was ex-Hewlett Packard. We're very close with these guys. We've just been demonstrating their stuff at our show last week in Las Vegas, being able to demonstrate how over these low-power networks they're particularly suited for things like smart cities, where you do have parking sensors or whatever it happens to be, but they're a significant cost advantage. Now the telcos will tell you, hang on a second, narrowband IoT is just about to be here and that'll solve it. And that will certainly help the telcos. But our view is that Wi-Fi has its space, as does radio, as does cellular, as does the low power wide area networks. Mm-hmm. So cellular for us, that motto of the right connectivity for the right device is something that really resonates, particularly with smart cities and smart energy, but not so much with connected car because they need much more bandwidth, and cellular is ideal for them.
What about the question of analytics? Because really, IoT is all about analytics. Is a stream of data going every which way. There's disagreement. Do we do the computing at the endpoint? Do we transfer the data back to headquarters? Mike, what's your view on that? Do you recommend one thing or the other for companies? I know it's very situational, but what do you think?
Well, it really depends on the algorithm and what data you're trying to get and what insight you're gathering. I think in general, what we're going to see is kinds of streaming controls where we can push out the processing as far to the edge as we can, in every case as far out as we can, and that will be the gold standard. And it's not always going to be able to push it out to the edge, but it will be pushed out as far as possible in the future.
The advantage being what?
Just because as you centralize the data, you've got more to store, you've got more to protect, you've got more expensive infrastructure to hold it. You really want to take advantage of that distributed computing that's going to naturally emerge in any sort of networked environment. We expect, as the cost of a computing device in this Internet of Things goes down and the power goes up for it to calculate something. I mean, we talked about the power in your phone, and you can imagine the memory density and the computing power that's going to come out in the next generations of chips. You're going to want to take advantage of that and push the computing out in a distributed way. This is kind of what we see with scale-out computing and big data already. When you scale out into a cluster rather than scale up a machine. So the Internet of Things takes that even broader and says let's try to push out what we can do, map it out, and then reduce that data as it comes to the center as much as possible.
Yeah, James, storage and building upon what he was just talking about, storage and master data management become even more important in the IoT. There's no question about it. There's so much chaff in all the data that has to be eliminated, and the more you eliminate at the endpoint, the better it is for the central processing. And this is just a huge challenge for anybody, any company that's looking at an IoT strategy of any kind. You got to look at the storage, you got to look at your compression, you got to look at your deduplication, and it's not just security. Security's huge. Well, let's get the data clean first. I think that is fundamental to the success of all this, because if you don't, it's very, very expensive to clean it up afterwards.
Jason, what's your take at the endpoint at home base? Where is the analytics happening these days?
I mean, it's about having a flexible framework to distribute it, processing and storage where it makes sense. I totally agree with what we're saying. I mean, we've been really pushing on the notion of edge analytics since we began our whole strategy, and we've seen the same players that were talking about cloud like last year now coming to us saying, hey, how about that whole notion of edge analytics, because they got the bill, like, sending all the data to the cloud like a bad episode of Hoarders.
Okay.
Getting all this stuff like pouring back. I mean, or the other way I put it is like, let me FedEx myself a bunch of data, and then I'm going to put it in my closet, just never a bunch of packages, and then put it in my closet and never touch it. Because, I think the stats, like 99% of data that's collected and sent to the back end isn't analyzed. So obviously there's some work to be done there, just in terms of making sense of that data.
That's right.
But we see the edge as being the spam filter for your cloud. And it's all about running complex event processing in memory, stream, in the moment at the edge, as close to the things as possible.
Mm-hmm.
To do that kind of real-time housekeeping. You can also be applying security measures at that time in memory, and you can also be applying the metadata models and stuff to wherever that data goes in the future. To the point earlier of just around the data management, so you're kind of putting the housekeeping rules on at the moment of inception, at the edge, doing meaningful analytics there, so you send meaningful data to the back end, and then there's this symbiotic relationship between the kind of core analytics in the back end and what you're doing at the edge. And the back end could be your on-prem data center, and that's as far as it goes, or it could be all the way to the cloud. It's not about any single model. It's about applying the right model for the right use case. And it also, sorry, one last thing, it also depends on the connectivity, is that you wouldn't necessarily, when you're running on cell, for example, you definitely want to be doing local analytics, so you don't just backhaul everything over cell. But to Nigel's point, LoRa changes things a little bit, and in a Sigfox kind of scenario, low power wireless, but it all comes into play.
Nigel, I just heard your name mentioned. People are talking about your opinions. Your view on analytics? I mean, is it an endpoint? I think like going into the future, analytics is going to be done more and more at the endpoint. To be less and less need to transfer it back. What's your take on where analytics happens ideally?
So, I mean, there's not too much more I can add to what Jason was saying. I mean, I absolutely agree with him. But a little earlier, just before we started, we were talking about basketball, and the last basketball game 5, was we launched a new ad, Hewlett Packard Enterprise did, and it's all about the machine. And the machine in the terms of IoT, where we've created this new technology that is all memory-centric. And it's exactly to Jason's point. Everything will be done in memory, and particularly where you have real-time systems, it has to be done in memory just for speed. And I encourage you, I think they're going to do the advert again from Hewlett Packard Enterprise on the game this evening, Game 6, where you'll see the machine advert, and it's based on Star Trek, of course, because that would be cool and trendy. And the ad's quite clever, because it's basically this new concept of how do you redesign the way the computers are built. Instead of being built around chips, you build them around memory. So have a look at the ad. It's also fun. There's a sense of humor in there.
Absolutely.
And you might see a basketball game in there too.
Along the way, it's a minor detail, yeah.
It's like the Super Bowl, right?
Let's stare into our crystal ball to sort of wrap up our discussion. If we're thinking about, what are we going to be talking about when we talk about IoT, say 3 to 5 years from now? And what kind of advice would you give to businesses that are either in IoT now or going to deploy to it? What does the future hold for the Internet of Things looking out a few years? Mike, what does your crystal ball say?
Well, I think we might have even started talking about this way. The technologies have existed for some time to connect devices to a network and talk about them. There's nothing really magically new in that sense. But I think in a couple of years, 3 to 5 years, we won't be calling it the Internet of Things. It will just be the Internet again.
It's like the cloud. The term cloud computing will eventually become obsolete.
Well, cloud still has some public-private thing, but I think Internet of Things we're going to start to assume that much like your phone and your watch and your Fitbit and your Nest thermometer and your car, that everything is really just going to be connected. You're not really going to be thinking about that as a separate kind of paradigm for a data flow or architecture. So I think it normalizes. But between here and there, there's a lot of work to do on reinventing how we talk about it, how we document it, how we design it as engineers. Even one of the things that I think there's a big gap in is standards.
Standards, for sure. It's a real
right?
question. Yeah.
Standards for data, standards for protocol, standards for interchange. And how if you're going to even take data and pass it up and down a supply chain, it would be great if there were standards among those people participating in that. So,
right.
there you go.
Chris, what do you see in your crystal ball? What are we going to be talking about for IoT a few years ahead?
Yeah, I agree. The IoT is a new and exciting term now, but it's for some old stuff and for some new stuff. 3 years from now, we might still be talking about it. 5 years from now, I don't think so. We're going to be used to these activities, these functions, the smartness within devices. We're going to take them for granted, like we take XML for granted or Java for granted right now. It's going to be, or the internet itself. We just it will evolve and it will become part of the culture. And we won't even need to mention the name that much. I think it's just going to be the internet, like Mike just said. So that's the way it is. That's the way the cloud is evolved, and that's the way PCs and evolved, and watches and
right.
tablets and smartphones and all of them. So
we can use our Fitbit to text our refrigerator or our coffee machine and get things going that way.
Oh, yeah. Can I insert just a really interesting use of the IoT?
Please. Yeah.
There's a new startup here in Redwood City where I live called Init, and it's a kitchen, okay? And what they do is they connect all the devices in a kitchen, and we used to talk about the toaster, the smart toaster, and the smart fridge and all this. But here's one result. You'll be able to look at your smartphone, push a button, see what's in your refrigerator, and there's a camera in there that'll tell you what's in there, and then the refrigerator will look at it and weigh everything and see the freshness of everything and judge it, and then give you a recipe for some of the ingredients that you have in the fridge right now for dinner tonight.
Wow. Okay, that's impressive.
And within a couple minutes.
The problem is you still have to cook it, but okay.
Yeah.
How lazy are we getting? I don't know.
Yeah. I can't wait till there comes the day where I go shopping for a refrigerator and have to conduct Turing test kind of interviews on the different refrigerators to find the smartest one.
Right.
That I want to buy for my house, right?
What's their taste in food? Do you have similar tastes in food?
We're gonna need to have an IoT IQ test.
Exactly.
Jason, what do you think going forward in the future? What's coming up for IoT a few years from now?
I mean, like I said before, this market goes vertical before it goes horizontal, and just it's all about use cases and all banding together on some of these lower level standards, for that interoperability. So where you can really get to the more of the air quotes Internet of Things, it's really a series of increasingly larger intranets. And so it's like, while we very so much subscribe to starting small today, like go solve some real problems, and then you connect your smart ag solution to your cold chain logistics solution, then to your factory floor, and all those need to be interoperable ultimately, and that's where we're headed. So it's very important to work on those kind of core standards to make that happen. But right now, start with small, real problems for customers. The other thing I'll say, it's very important to be thinking about where we're headed with analytics long term. And so we like to say architect for analytics. So we have a lot of people doing great things with Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and BeagleBone and you name it, and it's awesome stuff. And then everyone's like, well, I'm going to go put out these devices out there at the edge, and all I need to do is collect data, so I'm good. I'm going to send it to the back end. Well, we're finding already people are like, well, crap, I put that stuff out there, but now I got to drive a truck out to that remote site because I actually need to push some intelligence down to that thing. So we do caution people to not rush to go put barely enough horsepower at the edge to run the job. If you can afford a little bit more horsepower for that job, you're going to find new things that you can do with it. Mm-hmm. Great example, remote monitoring of an elevator. we've got a customer we're working with that's doing this. So it's like, hey, I put this here. All I need to do is pull data to kind of understand what's going on with that asset, so I can do predictive maintenance on that asset. Well, guess what? What if you wanted to run, turn the pots over to VoIP, so that you can run that as a service? What if you wanted to run the digital signage for all the eyeballs going through that elevator? Like you might want to run multi-tenant on that gateway to do those things, or whatever computing you have in the there. Don't be too hasty with putting the compute out, because you're going to pay for it later if you don't think about where you might head with it in that 3 to 5 year time frame. So it's just about kind of thinking ahead for where you could grow.
Build a better structure right up front.
But invest in the right infrastructure without going overboard. But like, you just think about the long term, and then also it's all about us working together on some of those standards so that we can get to that binding the intranets together.
Nigel, you know what the future holds, so tell us, in the year 2020, Internet of Things, what will we be thinking about?
So the back end, I think, will consolidate, and the back end will consolidate down to some large vendors that are able to do the heavy lifting, to be able to put in that standards-based infrastructure that allows you to be able to manage it. There will be crazy innovation on the front end. Once they understand what those standards are, then people will innovate like crazy on the devices, and so you'll see a ton of startups.
Such as, you mean just functionality, or what do you mean by the crazy
example of the fridge? Like the example of the fridge. I mean, those type of devices. We're seeing all these companies popping up that are building new trackers and all sorts of clever innovations happening on the device side. But there will be consolidation, in my view, on the back end, on the stuff where the heavy lifting is, and this is from the edge compute platforms through to how we treat data, through to analytics. I think that'll consolidate, because it'll become more, there's just more and more data, and you need to be able to scale it out. Yeah. That movement to standards is absolutely critical. I mean, we chose the 1M2M standard, but I'm sure more standards are going to evolve. But the idea of having a common data model is critical. And the example I'll use is, we're talking to a car manufacturer, and they told us, if anybody comes to us with another killer application, we're going to shoot them. What we want is a killer platform that we can plug anything into, because they were like most companies. They start with the device, they have an application tied to it, it's hardwired together, and then you have your next device and your next device, and then you got another application, and you just can't scale it that way. And it's particularly interested in connected cars, because cars are mobile, and they will interact with smart cities, with parking, with energy. As EV becomes more and more critical, they'll have to integrate with the grid. So connected vehicle is a great thing to think about. You've got to be able to cross verticals, and so that ability to have a common data model, a common way of accessing data, of using it, and being able to access services, it has to go horizontal in the end. But right now it's all verticalized, and that will over time mature so that it then becomes horizontal.
I mean, ultimately, a vertical solution is a great horizontal scalable platform with vertical domain knowledge applied. But initially, you got to go vertical to get people to adopt, to understand what they can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sounds fantastic. And on that note, I've got to go program my coffee machine, because I can't do it with my hands. So there you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate your expertise. I will send you the link. We can all tweet about it. And thanks. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right. See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.